Have you ever experienced something that completely changes your perception of reality? Marcus Morgan, an experienced mountaineer, decides to conquer the peaks of Sagar, the most dangerous and hidden mountains of the Tibetan Plateau. This is not a place for ordinary travelers, and he knows that if he can complete this route, he will confirm his status as a master. But something goes wrong. Soon after setting off, he loses contact with the world, and his tracks disappear into the very center of the misty void. Why do his tracks disappear, and searches drag on for weeks without yielding a single answer? What do these mountains hide, and why do even experienced explorers encounter invisible forces? Strange symbols, disappearing tracks, and unexplained phenomena. Is it just nature, or something much more sinister? Stay tuned to find out how this story ends, and don't forget to subscribe if you want more. Marcus Morgan had always been a man of action. Bold and determined, he found joy in overcoming challenges, whether it was a career in military intelligence, extreme sports, or traveling to the most remote corners of the earth. But this time, things were different. His latest adventure wasn't just another trip to the ends of the earth. It was a personal challenge, the kind of goal he'd been working toward his entire life. In recent weeks, Marcus had spent days and nights preparing for his trek into the Sagar Mountains, a remote part of the Tibetan Plateau. Unlike more popular peaks, the mountains were less frequented and remained off the radar of most travelers. For Marcus, they represented his final challenge, a place he had always wanted to conquer, but whose remoteness and difficulty meant it was out of reach for most. Tibet was more than just a geographical point on a map for him. This place, full of ancient legends and misty stories of eclipsed peaks and mysterious forces hiding their faces, had always attracted him. He had already successfully climbed several difficult routes, and all of them gave him confidence. But here, in the Sagar Mountains, a new challenge lurked, a new limit of possibilities. He carefully studied maps, read reports from previous explorers, and consulted local guides. For many, these mountains were a myth, where even the most experienced climbers disappeared. Marcus, however, was confident that if he followed the right path and paid close attention to detail, he would succeed in his mission. He set out in early August when the weather was at its best and before the traditional snowfalls. His goal was simple: to reach the highest point of the Sagar Mountains, where no one had yet climbed. Leaving the bustle of the city behind, Marcus was ready to absorb all the impressions that the mountain silence provides. Even on the plane, flying over Tibet, he felt a strange premonition that seemed to come from these empty, majestic mountains. He knew it was only his imagination, but he could not shake the feeling that somewhere in these snowy expanses there was something more hidden. After the first few days on the mountain trails, Marcus enjoyed every moment. The clean air, the distance from civilization, the peace in which he could focus only on his thoughts. All this filled his inner confidence. He admired the grandeur of nature, where every stone and every crack in the rock seemed to be part of an ancient story that held answers to questions that had tormented people's minds for centuries. But there is always something unpredictable in the Sagar Mountains. Already on the fourth day of the journey, Marcus felt that something was wrong. The wind suddenly changed direction, and the sky darkened as if a thunderstorm was about to break. He checked his instruments, the satellite connection, made sure that everything was in order, but a strange feeling of unease did not leave him. He continued moving, not allowing doubts to prevail. On the fifth day, Marcus reached a pass that overlooked an unknown part of the mountains. According to his plan, he was supposed to set up camp at this point. This is where the problems began. No matter how much he looked for a comfortable place to spend the night, everything seemed strange. The rocks were too close to each other, and the soil was too hard. The sky was becoming increasingly overcast, and it was decided to spend the night in a tent. As he entered the tent, Marcus felt his tension begin to ease. He unpacked his backpack, cooked a light dinner, and opened the book he had brought with him. But as he began to read, lightning flashed on the horizon. The storm had erupted suddenly, and the wind hit with such force that the tent seemed about to be blown away. Marcus went outside to check his gear and prepare it for the harsh weather. As he stepped into the mist surrounding the pass, he felt something was wrong in the air. From somewhere in the dark corners of the mountains, strange sounds were coming from deep within the massif itself. He winced, trying to figure out if it was the wind or something else, but he soon decided it was just his imagination and returned to the tent. The weather was getting worse, and he knew he had to continue on the next day. However, during the night, amidst all this wild noise and raging elements, his sleep was interrupted by a strange rustling sound coming from outside. His instincts kicked in, and Marcus felt that in that moment he might be part of something beyond his understanding. He stood up, opening the tent door, but what he saw made his heart stop. Fog shrouded everything, but the sky was now as dark as an inky abyss. And then he knew something was there, unknown, hidden, but very real. The morning began as expected, with the wind whistling endlessly, seemingly without stopping for a minute. Marcus knew he had to move on. The weather wasn't improving, and he had to continue climbing despite the worsening conditions. He quickly packed up camp, checked his gear, and did his best to prepare for the difficult route that lay ahead. However, despite all his preparation and experience, he couldn't shake the feeling that something about these mountains was nagging at him. The fog wasn't clearing, but rather it was growing thicker. He could feel his steps becoming more careful, the air becoming denser, making it harder to breathe with each breath. Marcus tried not to think about it and concentrated on the path, looking at the tracks in the snow. He couldn't tell exactly how much further he had to go, but he could definitely feel something changing in this place. Several hours passed, and he managed to overcome several steep sections. When he climbed another hill, he stopped to rest and check the map. It was strangely quiet around him. It was one of those rare moments when even the wind disappeared and only the snowstorms continued their dance in the clouds. Whether he was looking into the future or the past, he could not say for sure. His eyes could barely make out the outlines of the mountains, which now seemed even more distant. And then he heard it, the same sound that had haunted him from the start. A rustling, soft at first, then louder, branches snapping in the distance. They were moving too fast to be the result of natural wind. Marcus froze, listening. A strange sensation came over him, as if someone was nearby and that someone was watching him. His breathing quickened, and his hand involuntarily reached for the knife strapped to his hip. The fog shrouded the mountains, but he could clearly see one detail: tracks. They weren't just animal tracks or human tracks, but some very strange and quickly disappearing tracks that seemed unnatural. They led in the direction he was heading, almost invisible against the snow, but still obvious. It made his heart beat faster. Marcus followed them despite his doubts. He felt like it was a mistake, but a voice inside him told him he couldn't stop. He kept going, even though the fog was getting thicker. He couldn't see more than a few meters ahead, and his steps became more and more cautious. The sky overhead darkened, and the wind picked up sharply. As he reached another turn in the mountain trail, his satellite connection stopped working. Marcus tried to reconfigure the device, but it remained dead. He accepted this as normal. Weather could affect the satellites, but when he looked at the map again, he noticed something odd. One of the trail markers was marked as wrong way, and there were no other trails in sight. He felt like something was wrong. He continued to move forward, but his every thought was filled with suspicion. As he began to push through the impassable part, where the snow was deeper and the wind stronger, he noticed something strange in the distance, as if several silhouettes were visible in the fog, unclear and moving. His eyes tried to decipher this picture, but he could not understand what it could be. Too fast, too uncertain. Marcus stopped and pressed himself against the rock, watching the shapes that were now moving towards him. Something was wrong. He tried to calculate their direction, but suddenly felt a sharp pain in his chest. It was not a physical impact, but rather an internal pressure, as if the air itself. His hands were frozen, and his gaze was fixed on the side where the silhouettes had once been. Before he could take a single step, everything disappeared, like fog, like smoke. And then, when he tried to understand what had happened, his legs seemed to stop moving. It was as if he was trapped in an invisible net that did not allow him to step forward. The next moment, his consciousness was swallowed by darkness. It was unknown how long he stood there. Everything around him seemed strange. His vision was blurred, and his hearing and sense of smell no longer registered reality. When consciousness returned, Marcus realized that he was in a different place. Every instinct in his body screamed that he was not alone. His sense of the presence of others was not just intuition, it was knowledge. He opened his eyes and saw a cliff in front of him. There was a chasm in front of him that led somewhere into the endless white wastelands. But what scared him most was that, despite the eerie silence, the feeling that he was not alone did not leave him. At that moment, Something in his mind understood. It was not the fog or the cold, but the mountain itself that was his enemy. And if he did not turn back, if he did not leave this path, he would disappear just like the others whose tracks he had seen. And perhaps the next time he took a step, the fog would leave him no way to return. Marks was gone. The traces had disappeared. Not even a fragment remained that would indicate that he could be found. Marcus had disappeared. The initial report from his companions was, as always, standard: no contact. At first, no one paid any attention to it. The guides he had entrusted with his accompaniment assured him that he was simply having equipment problems, and that he would be able to cope with the difficulties he encountered along the way. But when the deadline specified in his route plan passed and contact with him was still not restored, anxiety began to mount. The first reaction, as expected, was standard for such situations. A search operation was launched, but no one believed that it would require anything supernatural. He disappeared, so it was an accident. He either got lost or had an accident. Such thoughts initially hovered among the team members and rescuers. On the morning of the day after Marcus had failed to contact them, the search party had reached the pass where his position had last been recorded. It was a risky area, a ridge, a place where sudden changes in the weather would have thrown anyone into confusion. However, there was nothing at the place where Marcus was supposed to set up camp. No sign of the tent, no sign of his backpack, not even the slightest trace of human activity. Everything was empty. The search at this point seemed routine, even standard. Searchers combed the area, used drones to film the area, and dogs detected only scents that did not lead to him. The team sensed that something was wrong, but at the time they could not articulate what exactly was causing such strange anxiety. 2 days passed, and the searchers discovered their first serious deviation. In the forest, on the path that led to the summit, they found tracks. Only these were not simply the tracks of boots. They were strange, as if the tracks themselves had no logic. 2 straight lines, scraps that seemed to disappear without a trace in the open space. At first, they thought it might be due to some natural phenomenon, such as a strong wind, which could distort the tracks. But these tracks were moving in one direction, towards the abyss where the empty, frozen ground began, and not in the direction of his route. It was here that the group encountered their first real paradox. There was no sign that Marcus had moved on, but no human, no companion could have vanished so quickly, leaving no trace behind. This could mean one thing: he could have been somewhere nearby, hiding from view, or something had prevented him from returning. The search leader, Liam, was the first to notice something odd. He unfolded the map and peered at the terrain, trying to compare it to the real situation. "This is impossible," he whispered, when he realized that according to the map, this area shouldn't exist. Everything pointed to the fact that they were traveling along a non-existent trail. This was the first strong hint that something in this place defied the usual laws of logic and perception. With each new step, with each new turn, the search party was further immersed in an atmosphere of the unknown. where rational explanations lost their power. Soon they came to the next section where they assumed Marcus might have stopped. At this section, a strange stone with symbols carved around the edges was discovered. The same symbols were found in several other places along the way where the group followed his possible route. Liam, an expert in archaeology and ancient manuscripts, became more wary. He studied the stone, trying to understand what exactly these signs meant. He was sure that this was not a coincidence, and that these symbols were probably connected to ancient cults or rituals that were once carried out in these places. Perhaps this was an area that could be dangerous for those who did not know its history. But the more Liam thought, the more questions arose. His thoughts were restless, as if the stone he held in his hands was only part of something greater. He put the stone down and looked again at the fog that was descending on their path, as if it were clouding their vision. Everything around him was becoming less real, as if nature itself had subjugated this place to its will. "Marcus, what happened to you?" Liam whispered softly, clutching the map in his hands, trying to see even the slightest trace. A few more days passed, and the search became more intense. The use of technology, drones, and new survey methods yielded some results, but all they could find was that the tracks were moving in a strange, illogical direction. All the team could do was move on. There were no answers yet, but the fog was not lifting. All this time, Liam had this strange feeling. It was some kind of inner knowing that Marcus was somewhere nearby, somewhere hidden, but not lost. But this whole place, this climate, this eerie fog, did not allow him to come close to the solution. The problem was not only the tracks, but something much more incomprehensible. And with each new step, the search party plunged into an atmosphere that was increasingly becoming something unknown and frightening. The days grew more difficult. The fog did not dissipate, it only grew stronger. The wind seemed to blow hats from faces, under clothes, making every minute spent outdoors a real trial. The Sagar Mountains became more gloomy and inhospitable with each passing hour. And if at first the search party believed that they would soon find an explanation for Marcus's disappearance, now they began to realize that the mystery was much more complex than they could have imagined. The leader of the search, Liam, noticed that their group, despite its experience, was becoming increasingly exhausted. Nevertheless, he continued to press the search, secretly hoping that they would eventually find some clue that could lead them to a solution. However, what they began to discover made his heart beat faster. On the fourth day of searching, the group came across another set of tracks that were clearly not Marcus's. They were tracks made by something other than a human, more like paw prints, but they were too large and too oddly shaped to be normal for the animals that inhabited these mountains. Liam examined the tracks closely, wondering what they could be. "These can't be normal animal tracks," he said. "They're too big and too indistinct to be just animal tracks." The group continued on, but the tracks became increasingly mysterious. By the time they reached the base of one of the higher peaks, they began to feel a strange heaviness in the air. Liam noticed that his breathing had become heavy, as if the air here was slightly different. He began to feel that there was more to this place than just nature. There was a strange sound under their feet, not an ordinary stone sliding down a cliff, but something more muffled. And as soon as they approached the place where the sound came from, a strange picture opened up before them. A stone slab covered with unknown symbols lay below, seemingly thrown here by nature, but it should not have been there. "Look," Liam said, leaning down to examine the symbols. "This looks like part of some ancient map, only it clearly shouldn't be here." The symbols were unfamiliar, but Liam knew immediately that they could not be a coincidence. These signs obviously had a meaning that pointed to some unknown territory. This slab was not a natural stone, but rather an intricately carved object, perhaps part of some ancient culture or ritual. This was not just a mysterious place, it was a place where time and space seemed to merge and hide their secrets. One of the group members, Thomas, a surfer and experienced climber named, who had been with the search party from the beginning, came closer, examining the rock. "These aren't just symbols," he said. "They're like a map. Only it leads to a different place, not to the top, but deeper." Liam looked at the map again, and his heart sank. There was no route they could follow. These symbols were leading them somewhere completely new, somewhere unknown, somewhere in the heart of this mountain range, where no one had gone before. He felt like they were in the middle of nowhere, something too complex and dangerous to leave here. "We shouldn't go there," Liam said, though it might have been too late to stop. But it was too late to refuse. The group moved on resolutely, driven not only by the desire to find Marcus, but also by some inner urge they could not understand. With each step they took, they felt the world around them become stranger. It wasn't just a feeling, it was a reality in which their usual perception of the world no longer worked. The rocks became more threatening, and the forest seemed dense and alive, as if it was trying to swallow them up. When they reached the place indicated by the slab, Liam stopped. He felt that they were on the threshold of something inexplicable. A giant chasm opened up before them, descending into a dark abyss. Here they found something else strange. There was something hard under the nails. These were bones. Human or animal, Liam could not tell. But one thing was clear. These bones were not there by accident. It was as if they were left there intentionally, as a sign. As soon as they examined this place, Liam had a strong feeling that this was the very boundary that no one should cross. "This isn't just a place," he whispered. "It's some kind of failure. It doesn't add up. We just don't know where we are." At this place, among the bones and dark symbols, the search party felt that their actions were disturbing something important, something ancient and mystical. And as they moved away from this place, this feeling only grew stronger. They found no obvious trace of Marcus. However, they felt that everything that had happened to them here was not an accident. Someone or something was leading them, pushing them further where no one should be. And that was just the beginning. The search for Marcus continued, but with each new step, with each new discovery, The search party became more and more confident that they were looking not only for a man, but also for answers to questions that could change their understanding of this place itself. What they had found last time was taking them further and further from their usual categories. A stone slab with unknown symbols, strange footprints, and bones that seemed to have been left intentionally. All this pointed to something more than just the mysterious disappearance of one person. Liam was now sure that there was something hidden here that defied conventional explanation. However, despite the growing sense of a mystical presence, the group could not stop. Something in them still forced them to move forward, as if they were following a route that had been predetermined for them in advance. Liam and Thomas, the most experienced of the group, looked at each other and, despite all this, decided to move on. The next morning, they reached a new point, another rock wall, which, like the previous one, had symbols on it. But this time they were much more obvious. It was a map, as if painted on the rock itself. It pointed the way to one of the most remote peaks in the Sagar Mountains. Peaks that were so unexplored that almost no one knew about them. Liam studied the map carefully, and, strangely, he knew that this was where they had to go. He felt like this decision wasn't his. It was like a revelation, like something external that didn't give him and his team the right to doubt. The path indicated on this map led them to an unknown place, hidden from view. The feeling of inevitability grew, and he knew that they had to go on, despite the fear and doubt. This isn't just a search, he told his companions. This isn't just Marcus. We have to figure out what's going on here to finish what we started. The further they walked, the thicker the fog became. Its density made it impossible to see more than a few meters, and their steps became more and more cautious, as if someone or something was watching them. And then, when they reached another point on their path, they felt it again. A strange atmosphere, viscous like thick fog. They stopped at the foot of a gigantic stone structure. It looked like a temple. Ruined walls, huge columns, all surrounded by an unusual shadow. It seemed as if this temple had been here long forgotten, hidden from view. Its size was impressive, but something about it was unsettling. "This is the place," Liam said, turning a little pale. "This is where all the maps point. This is the place we must explore." The rest of the group silently agreed, and they began to walk around the ruins. However, the more time they spent in this temple, the stronger the feeling became that they were disturbing something important. Liam even began to hear strange sounds that came from the depths of these ruined walls. Sometimes it seemed like someone was talking. Sometimes something was moving in the shadows. As they explored the temple, one of the women in the group, Sarah, found something of interest. A hidden door that led down into dark, almost invisible stairs. Liam felt like he had no choice now, and with each step, the feeling that they were being guided not simply by their own decisions, but by some force became more and more apparent. "What is this place?" Sarah asked as they approached the stairs leading to the dungeon. "I don't know," Liam replied, but there was concern in his voice. "But we have to get down there. It's the only thing we haven't explored yet." They descended into the dungeon, and with every step, The air grew thicker and colder. The wind that blew through was unnatural, cold and dry, with a strange smell. Liam knew that this place held answers, but those answers had to be too terrible to be easily explained. At the very bottom, they found something amazing. It was a circular room, and in the center stood a huge stone statue. It was too strange and broken to be associated with any known culture. The statue depicted a creature that could not be animal or human, but rather something in between, with eyes that seemed to watch their every move. And then they noticed something that made their hearts skip a beat. Under their fingernails on a stone slab were carved the same symbols as on the slab in the forest. Only now they weren't just symbols. They made up a whole map along which someone had walked long ago, leaving this trace behind. "These aren't just footprints," Thomas said quietly, pointing to the slabs that had begun to glow with a dim light. "This is all connected. Marcus may have found this place before us." As soon as they approached the slab from which the light emanated, they felt that the air around them became alive, as if something invisible was watching them. The statue, with its huge eyes, seemed now not just a stone figure, but something that would at some point come to life. "We were wrong," Liam said quietly. "We shouldn't have come here. We should have stopped at that rock we found in the woods. This isn't just a place, it's a trap, and we're in it." Then they felt the soil beneath their nails begin to change, as if the ground beneath their feet was becoming alive. And at that moment, some invisible mechanism was activated. The feeling that they had violated something important became inevitable. And then something strange happened. From deep within the temple came a sound, not loud, but like breathing, heavy, as if the earth itself were breathing. Everything seemed to freeze, and their footsteps became unnaturally quiet, the air thick and cold. In that moment, Liam realized that the answers they sought were here, in this room, but they were not meant for them. Before they could take a single step, the shadow in the hall began to move. The shadow, which was part of the wall itself, became long and strange, and no matter how hard they tried to resist, it moved behind them, following. And at some point, they realized that they had become part of this ancient world that had swallowed them up. The shadow continued to move behind them, and with each movement, it seemed as if the walls of this dungeon were not just surrounding them, but actually closing in. Liam felt his heart begin to beat faster, and a vague premonition arose in his mind that this hall, this temple, this entire mountain was somehow alive. He felt an invisible force guiding them, forcing them along a path they might not have chosen themselves. The shadow wall began to change shape, its outlines becoming more and more strange and unnatural. Liam looked at the others. Their faces were tense, their eyes were wide, and every step was now filled with fear. They felt that this place was not just an ancient structure. It was something more sinister, hidden from human understanding. And suddenly, as if by magic, the air around them became even thicker. It wasn't just the cold they felt on their skin. It was something else, a feeling that the space around them was beginning to warp. The fog that always surrounded the Sagar Mountains was now even thicker, and it felt like the entire world was being squeezed into this dark, frightening hall. Sarah, who had been silent all this time, at some point wavered and raised her hand. She pointed to a dark corner of the room. Strange lights flickered in the darkness, as if they were particles of some invisible light. It was like the flickering of distant stars, but the light was too close, too strange, to be ordinary. "Do you see this?" she whispered, her voice filled with anxiety. "This can't just be light. This isn't just a phenomenon." Before Liam could answer, a sound came from somewhere in the dark corner. Faint at first, almost imperceptible, but with each passing moment, it became louder and clearer. It sounded like a whisper, as if several voices were trying to break through the thickness of time and space. "Who is it?" Thomas breathed. He was white as a sheet, and his face was distorted with fear. "We are not alone here." Liam felt a chill run down his spine. They weren't just on the border between two worlds. This place was a gateway through which something could enter their world. They might have broken the rules, intruded into a space where they weren't welcome. "We have to get out of here," Liam said. "We have to go back. This place is not meant for us." But as he took a step toward the exit from somewhere above, from where it seemed there was no way to hear anything, a deep, booming sound came, echoing throughout the temple. It was not the sound of stone or nature. It was something else, something that seemed to resonate with the very air around them. The ground beneath their feet shook, and at that moment, something terrible and inexplicable happened. The walls of the temple began to flicker, and the lights they had seen before began to move, gliding through the air, creating strange patterns in the darkness. The lights began to get closer, and soon they were right in front of them. The lights took the form of a being. It was translucent, its shape shifting, and all that could be seen was a shape that was constantly changing, like smoke, trying to escape its shell. Liam couldn't look away, and his mind was spinning. He felt like this wasn't just a vision. This was a real being that was here, in this place, and they were a part of it. "We shouldn't have come here," Thomas shouted, jumping away from the lights that were now surrounding them on all sides. But as soon as his words were out, the space around them changed. Nothing was the same. The dim light that flickered in this room began to spread, and the space seemed to stretch, as if the walls and floor had become blurred. Liam felt himself losing his bearings. He couldn't tell where the room began or ended. He looked around and recognized nothing. With each passing moment, their perceptions became more and more distorted. The world around them now seemed liquid, fluid, like water that changes its shape without leaving a clear trace. Liam tried to move, but his body moved against its own will. Sarah screamed in panic. She couldn't take it anymore and sat down on the floor. "This isn't the place. This isn't what we thought." Her eyes were full of horror. And then, when everything around began to dissipate and the lights disappeared into the fog, there was silence. But this silence was not just peace. It was heavy, like a tomb that hides something alive. Time no longer mattered in this place. Liam looked around. He felt like this place was still watching them, but now without any visible signs. It wasn't just a feeling, it was a knowing. They were in the wrong place, in the wrong time, and they had broken laws that were supposed to remain inviolate. They didn't find Marcus, but now they knew. This place was much more than just an ancient temple. It was a place of power, and that power didn't want anyone to mess with it. With every step, with every new discovery, they were drawn deeper into mysteries that were too great for them to understand. And no matter what they did, no matter what they tried to understand, they felt the mountain itself begin to swallow them up. They were no longer looking for Marcus. Now they were looking for only one way out. From this world they had accidentally awakened. Hours passed in languid silence, and the group, still shaken by what had happened, continued to move forward. Fear gripped them, but what scared them most was not the threat itself, but the knowledge that they were part of something much larger than a simple search operation. Mount Sagar seemed to be a living organism, and every step they took echoed in its dark depths. Liam was the only one who remained calm, even though a storm was raging inside him. He knew they had gone too far, but what could they do? Turn back? Stop? They had already passed this point, and now, even if they wanted to, they couldn't turn back. This path led them deeper into the heart of the mountain, and nothing seemed to be able to stop them from doing so. Liam glanced at his companions. They were exhausted, tired, and dejected. Sarah sat on a rock, staring blankly into the fog. Thomas was silent, staring at the misty horizon, his expression desolate. They all knew they were part of something that defied explanation. No sign of Marcus, no sign of life. All that was darkness, fog, and emptiness, from which there was no way back. Walking a few more kilometers, they came to another strange place. Not an ordinary rocky ridge, but a deep gorge, where the horizon disappeared behind an unknown shadow. No matter how much they tried to study the landscape, its outlines began to change shape. It was not just a feeling, it was a perception of reality, as if the space around them was distorting. The walls of the gorge moved. Their contours became blurred, and the rocks themselves acquired unreal, organic forms, as if they were made not of stone, but of something living. "A dark place," Thomas said, his voice shaking, as if realizing for the first time that his words were more than just a response to anxiety. This was knowledge. There really was something here that made the world seem alien. Liam walked to the edge of the ravine and peered down, but there was nothing to see. Everything was swallowed up by impenetrable darkness. He felt his mind begin to lose focus, and every new look at the world around him only confirmed that something inexplicable was happening here in these mountains. "We have to go down," he said, aware that this decision was not his, but an external impulse. His steps led him into a cave at the base of the gorge. The cave was enormous, as if the earth itself was swallowing up everything around it. The walls of the cave were covered with the remains of ancient paintings, but they had no connection with known cultures. This was something else, something older, perhaps even more terrible. When the group entered the cave, they immediately felt a strange pressure. There was no familiar sound of footsteps, no echo, as if the space was absorbing everything that was happening. But the strangest thing was that despite the lack of sounds, they all felt someone was watching them. As they walked through the cave, they came to an ancient slab that seemed to be the center of the place. On the slab, surrounded by runes and strange symbols, lay a backpack, the same backpack that belonged to Marcus. But Marcus himself was gone. He couldn't be here. Liam walked over to the backpack, his hands starting to shake. This was his first chance to find something to lead him to. But as he lifted the backpack, something else caught his eye, something glittering at the bottom of the backpack. It was a small metal plate covered in dust, but there was still a single word etched deep into the metal. "The way," Liam read aloud. The word made his heart skip a few beats. He tried to figure out what it meant, but every time he tried to connect the word to the current situation, his thoughts began to blur and his mind lost clarity. Sarah, standing nearby, said quietly, He knew where to go." "It can't be," Thomas muttered. "If he knew." But Liam didn't continue. He realized that none of this was an accident. This was a prophecy. This was the beginning of something much darker than they could have imagined. Everything that was happening here was part of a cycle they couldn't escape. At that moment, as they stood before the stove, the air changed again. The shadow that had been following them for hours began to thicken, and sounds, elusive and mysterious, began to resound around them again. But it wasn't just a feeling now, it was a real presence. It was getting closer, and Liam could feel his heart starting to beat faster. The mountain was silent, but its silence was complete. "We weren't supposed to come here," Liam said, even though he knew it wouldn't help. They were here, in this place, and the only way was to keep moving forward. But there was one terrible realization. The one watching them was not just part of the mountain. He was someone who had been here before them, and perhaps someone who would be here after. "Marcus," Sarah whispered, her voice fading into the vastness of this silent world. The dark shadow that had begun to gather around them was now so thick it was almost tangible. Liam stood in front of the slab, his heart pounding in his chest, and it felt like the very ground around him was breathing. The inside of his head was a mess, his thoughts racing, trying to make sense of what was happening. But there was no logic to it. The shadow continued to squeeze the space, and as they tried to move, its presence became even more tangible. "What is it?" Thomas asked, his voice shaking as if he was afraid his words might become part of the foggy emptiness that enveloped them. Liam didn't know what to say. He sensed that this mountain wasn't just hiding its secrets. It was part of something dark, something that existed outside of time and space. The mountain was silent, but its silence was complete and merciless. This was not just a place, but something older, more dangerous than any human could imagine. And here they were, on the edge of its abyss. The huge eyes of the statue they had seen before now seemed to be watching them, as if the figure itself was coming to life. Liam knew they were not alone, that the mountain had a will of its own, and it did not want anyone to penetrate its depths. Everything around them was becoming increasingly unstable, and space was warping. He felt his consciousness begin to lose clarity. At this moment, when the fog and darkness reached their peak, Sarah, who was standing nearby, looked up and pointed to the dark corners of the cave. "Look!" Her voice was full of fear and despair. This can't be." Liam turned sharply, following her directions. In the darkness of the cave, where there had been nothing before, new tracks had appeared. But these tracks were not human. They were not mere prints. They moved across the walls and floor as if the rocks themselves were leaving tracks, as if the cave itself were part of some living thing. "They're coming," Liam whispered, though he wasn't sure what he was talking about. He sensed that the tracks were more than just a sign, but a warning. He could see them beginning to diverge, as if pointing the way deeper into the cave. It was at that moment that the space around them began to distort. The stone walls that had seemed motionless before began to move, spreading out, as if they had no definite shape. Liam grabbed Sarah's hand. "We have to leave, now." His voice was sharp and decisive, but even he wasn't sure they could get out. But as soon as they began to move, the walls of the cave closed in, as if responding to their movement. The sad sounds, like whispers, began to intensify. With each step, they felt the space around them warp again. This effect was so strong that Liam felt as if everything that was happening was just a play of shadows. The fog thickened again. It seemed alive, almost tangible, and with each step they took, it grew thicker, enveloping them like an invisible wall. When they tried to speed up, their feet began to slip, as suddenly the fog cleared and they found themselves back where they started. Everything was dark and the same strange coldness hung in the air. But now they were standing in emptiness, as if nothing had changed. The cave was empty. The walls no longer moved. Their gaze fell on the backpack, which lay in the same place as before. "Is this all an illusion?" Sarah whispered, her voice filled with despair. "We can't get out. We can't understand anything." Liam glanced at the others. He saw their faces, and there was a desperation there that he felt too. But he knew they weren't just lost. They were part of what had happened here. Every step they took, every decision they made, had led them here, to this place, and they couldn't leave until they understood what it wanted from them. "Marcus," Thomas said, his voice shaking. "He knew what was wrong here. He knew where we were going. He probably already figured it out." Liam felt his body begin to cool. He felt that right now, at this moment, this mountain, this place, was absorbing all of their consciousness. And no matter how hard they tried to free themselves, they were bound to this space. They were no longer looking for Marcus. At that moment, they realized that they were already part of his disappearance. But the scariest thing was that every step they took them deeper into the heart of the mountain, and their presence was not an accident. This mountain knew them, It accepted them, and they could not leave it. The mountain was silent, and in this silence was everything. Liam looked again at the backpack, at the slabs, at the symbols that were starting to fade. He realized that they were all part of this puzzle, and there was no turning back. Instead, the mountain remained silent, but their traces remained, as if written into the very fabric of this world, as if forgotten, erased, but still present. And that was all.